KPBS On Demand is supported by Splatero, helping homeowners pay off debt or for home improvements by offering streamlined access to your home's equity with no additional monthly payments or new debt. Splatero provides a lump sum payment in exchange for a share of your home's future value. Learn more at splatero.com.
Welcome back to another edition of the KPBS Cinema Junkie podcast. I'm Beth Accomando. And I'm in the mood for Italian horror.
The dead! I see the dead! City of the dead!
That's right, films like Lucio Fulci's The Beyond, Dario Argento's Suspiria, and Mario Bava's Black Sunday. And the reason I'm in the mood for Italian horror is we just had Fabio Frizzi perform here in San Diego at Brick by Brick, courtesy of Horrible Imaginings Film Festival and Dread Central. Frizzi composed scores for many of Lucio Fulci's best-known horror films. He performed some of those scores here in San Diego for his concert, Frizzi to Fulci. Frizzi helped define Italian horror in the 1970s and 80s, with scores for films such as Zombie, City of the Living Dead, known as Paura in Italian, The Beyond, and Cat on the Brain. I had the opportunity to meet him at Abattoir, the horror festival of Wales, in 2013, then to interview him when he did a concert there in 2015. Check out Podcast 47 to hear my first overseas episode. This past week, he came to San Diego, where I not only got to see him in concert, but I also got to cook a big dinner for him and his band. Then I got to see him perform again in Los Angeles for Beyond Fest at the Egyptian Theater, where he played the score to The Beyond live. Hearing that score played live was a transcendent experience. All films should be experienced like that. From the opening percussion, you could feel the music rise up from the floor and enter your body through your feet, making the horror feel even more visceral. But Frizzi's scores are not only about the horror. His ethereal themes tend to challenge expectations. They're about elevating a genre film to tragedy and even to an existential realm. Helping to achieve this at the Composer's Cut screening of The Beyond at the Egyptian Theater was singer Giulietta Zanardi, whose haunting voice seemed to channel spirits from another world. Frizzi, Zanardi, and the entire band provided a breathtaking concert both in Los Angeles and San Diego. And all that got me thinking about Italian cinema and spaghetti horror in particular. My introduction to Italian horror came when I was a teenager and I went to see Suspiria in the 1970s.
It's useless to try and explain it to you. You wouldn't understand. It all seems so absurd, so fantastic. All I can do is get away from it as soon as possible.
Suspiria. The only thing more terrifying than the last 12 minutes of Suspiria are the first 92.
That was the perfect come-on for Dario Argento's film, which is the one that got me hooked on Italian horror cinema. I went to see it with a friend when I was in high school. If memory serves me right, it was the second feature on a double bill at the Jerry Lewis Cinemas in Chula Vista. Although by that time, it might have been renamed the Fiesta Twin Cinemas, but it was the first multiplex in my neighborhood. From the moment Suspiria started, I was riveted. The bold imagery, the lurid colors, the pulsing rock score by Goblin. It provided a window to an audacious and seductive new world. By But imagine my frustration when my friend, who had driven, bolted out of her seat after the opening murders and insisted we leave. It would take a couple of years before I actually got to see the end of that film. This was before VHS was booming, and it wasn't the type of film to play on TV. But perhaps that taste of Italian horror, without the satisfaction of a full meal, is what provoked my obsession. I could only imagine what followed, and I hungered to see more. And when I did, I was enthralled. Every frame of Suspiria is a work of art, and Argento was my first love in Italian horror. But Lucio Fulci and Fabio Frizzi soon followed with Zombie. So let's talk about Frizzi, Fulci, and the fevered dream of Italian horror. For this podcast, I speak again with Frizzi, as well as with musician Ryan Nestor, who came to the San Diego concert and who earlier this year had performed a live score for a screening of Suspiria at UC San Diego. And I end the podcast with an interview with Miguel Rodriguez of Horrible Imaginings and John Condit of Dread Central, who put on the concert at considerable personal expense. As an introduction to the waking nightmares of Lucio Fulci, I went back into the archives and pulled a story out that I did for Public Radio International's The World. And if I sound different, remember, I was decades younger.
If your idea of a scary film is the Rocky Horror Picture Show, well, this one might not be for you. It's Italian filmmaker Lucio Fulci's 1981 cult classic, The Beyond. And tonight is the premiere of the film's special re-release in the United States. The World's Beth Accomando has this profile of the Italian horror master and his gruesome film.
You are now entering hell, courtesy of Italian filmmaker Lucio Fulci. Fulci's 1981 film, The Beyond, is about a young woman who inherits a hotel that was built over one of the 7 gates of hell. Along with films such as Mario Bava's Black Sunday and Dario Argento's Phenomena, The Beyond defines Italy's unique brand of horror and fantasy. Lucio Fulci's films in particular have a striking visual style, a penchant for unrestrained gore, and the terror of a waking nightmare. Although the genre boasts such famous fans as Clive Barker, John Carpenter, and Quentin Tarantino, it has humble roots, says Antonella Fulci, daughter of the late director.
I don't think that here in Italy they have had a big impact when they came out because they were considered not B movies, Z movies. So they didn't consider it them so important to write about it.
Relegated as second-rate summer releases in their native Italy, these films were initially dismissed as schlock entertainment. For example, The Beyond was so gruesome that even its star, Catriona MacColl, admits to having a hard time watching the entire film.
I still find today various of the shots like the Joe, the plumber coming out of the bath, all of that, I find that absolutely horrendous. And there are various things. I think that's one of them that I actually can't watch. I have to sort of put my hands over my face and hide and wait till it's all over, which is kind of pathetic, but it still affects me in that way.
What makes Lucio Fulci's so-called spaghetti horror films so effective is their blend of visceral violence and subtle chills. In The Beyond, a tarantula attack turns into a gore fest. Fulci gives the film an uncomfortable edge by offering a shot from the point of view of the helpless victim's eye just before it's gouged out by a nasty spider. But Fulci also employed more subtle horror effects, says Antonella, who frequently joined her father on the set.
He was a dictator with the sound, and he said that even the sound is very scary sometimes, and it's true. He wanted that from the start to the end of the movie, all the people in the movie must seem dead somehow. So if you see, the light is very cold in the movie.
Italian horror films such as The Beyond are now being rediscovered on video and the festival circuit. Jerry Martinez, vice president of Rolling Thunder Pictures, is dedicated to distributing films which may have been overlooked when they first came out.
There's really not the discovery there used to be of like going to midnight shows and revival houses that used to be able to open up those doors for you. So to some degree, that's what we're trying to do. We're just trying to expose people to the different genres.
Catriona MacColl, the lead in The Beyond, already knows about Italian horror firsthand and believes that the midnight venue is perfect for the film.
On the stroke of midnight, the ghoulies and the ghosts come out. Maybe, I don't know. It's slightly kitsch showing it at midnight, but I think that's nice. as long as not too many people have nightmares afterwards when they go to sleep. I don't mind, but perhaps they'll all sleep perfectly peacefully, just like Lucio. I hope so.
Lucio Fulci claims never to have had a nightmare in his life. Yet his films have caused others to have more than a few nightmares, says his daughter.
I've shown them my tapes to some friends recently, and they are very young. They are younger than me, and I thought that so young people couldn't be frightened from anything, but they got scared, and they called me after when they went home late at night, "Oh yeah, I'm scared of this movie."
Actress Catriona MacColl thinks Lucio Fulci's obsession with horror and fear reflects the extreme emotions and passions of the Italian character.
The Italians are renowned for being terrific designers, so the artwork in those movies, especially considering they didn't have the technology that we have today, or the money, in actual fact, it's pretty incredible. Because when I describe to people the zombies, I remember being amazed when I saw Gianni making them up, and he finished off by just picking up a pot of orange jam and just pouring it at the top of their heads, so it all kind of drips down, and of course it's very effective.
Although not much seemed to scare Lucio Fulci, he seemed acutely tuned in to what could scare his audiences. Soon you too can get a chill as the quintessential spaghetti horror film returns to the screen and Fulci returns in his own way from beyond the grave. For The World, this is Beth Accomando reporting.
The elevator. Get the hell going.
That was a 1998 story I did for The World when The Beyond was re-released. I recorded my new interview with Fabio Frizzi on September 29th as we waited for the band's equipment to arrive at Brick by Brick. I have intercut some of the music from the San Diego concert into the interview where Frizzi talks about certain films. So I am here with Fabio Frizzi before the concert that's going on tonight at Brick by Brick. So tell me, how do you feel coming to San Diego?
It's like a virus that enters in your blood. Now, San Diego, it's a place where after a couple of hours you feel at home. You arrive, you do just a little tour, and you say, why I didn't come till today here?
And you guys checked out the ocean first thing when you came here.
Yes, because it was this year I had some little things in Adriatic Sea, Tyrrhenum Sea, and in the north of Europe I went to Oslo, so North Sea. I never had put my feet in the Pacific Ocean, so I thought, no, I have to do this. It's very, very cold. It's very cold, but for some minutes I had the chance to do. But it's so beautiful, cold but so beautiful, incredible.
And now you're here at Brick by Brick, and you were just telling me that you found out something about Taylor guitars here.
Yeah, many people know that I am a guitarist. I was born like a guitar player. And also, if it's quite strange to find a composer who has as first instrument the guitar, but there are. I am like this. I have every kind of guitar because I'm a collector, and so Gibson, Martin, Fender, everything. But I have no Taylor, and I love Taylor guitar. So we were waiting for people who were bringing our instruments, and arrives a big guy with seems a little guitar because in his hands, and it was our 12 strings. And the guys here tells me he is from Taylor. He works. What? What are you? And he keep out from a great, incredible guitar, 12 strings, well done. And he said, I did this one. No. So it was. And I asked him, maybe this is the first time I could have the chance to buy a Taylor guitar. Because Taylor is from here, and I didn't know it's from San Diego.
Tell me about the concert you're performing tonight. This is the Frizzi to Fulci. So tell me what it's about and why you put this together.
Let's say that Frizzi to Fulci was born 3 years ago, a little more than 3 years ago. But I would call this one Frizzi to Fulci 2.0, in the sense that every project goes ahead and so. And we started from Lucio, from this old friend, this great director, and now I'm trying to visit other moments of my life in that moment. For example, there is a new suite from here. It was called Devil Fish. Lamberto Bava movie, and I discovered to have the multi-track, so I mixed something that never was out as a CD, LP. So we published this, and I decided obviously also to promote, to create a new suite, 12 minutes of all the things. Also, other things are new. I mean, many new things. The project goes on. Aside, there is this new project called the Beyond the Composer's Cut, a joke that I wanted to a play that I wanted to do, rewriting something of the old score. Also, because if you have to do live a score live, you must play a little bit. With Lucio, we had cut a lot of music then, so I cannot stay on stage for 25 minutes. Now, so we decided we had in Austin the first American release, and people was very, very happy, sending and applauding. So I'm very happy, and I think those two projects are going ahead.
Last night, we all had a dinner, and Miguel Rodriguez from Horrible Imaginings and John Condit from Dread Central was there. And we were talking about horror films and about Lucio Fulci in particular. Yeah. So what do you think about the way Lucio Fulci made horror films that inspired you to create music that seems like so very different from other horror themes? I mean, you seem to kind of defy conventions and expectations. Was there something in what he was doing that kind of inspired you?
The magic was that when Lucio told me the first time to do Zombie 2, was for me the very first time I was thinking about horror. I was quite young, I was 29. But my life of composing was about 10 years. So I had written everything, but horror, no, it must happen. So the first problem for me was to find a way, and wasn't an easy choice, no, because you have to find some ideas out of you, obviously. You listen to good music, but in the end you must find an idea into yourself, because your music must be also you, not only ideas from abroad, from out of you. So I think that Lucio was very clear, and I am like in old times we made the pictures, the real pictures. You took a white piece of paper, then you impressed it, and the images remained on this paper. And I more or less like this. If somebody is clear and let me understand what he wants, what kind of sensation he wants, but I can try to do. And I think that it's my music, but we can ask ourselves why the Lucio Fulci work with me is maybe the most important I did. So I think it was also came from him, something very important to create this music.
You mentioned Zombie.
Yeah.
This is one of Lucio Fulci's films, and there is a scene in that where there is a zombie versus shark. And when he came to you and said, you need to compose some music for a zombie fighting a shark, what went through your head?
That was really a big problem, because it was the mean scene. There is also the eye, but that was a climax scene, in the movie. I had written many years, some years before, I had written a very similar theme, which was for Luigi Cozzi movie. So when Lucio asked me something very epic, something, I get back to this theme, and I say I can create something new. So the melody was new. The harmony is very similar to the other theme. The melody is better. We created something similar to the other one, but totally new. And it's true that the bass drum was with his hand, and that we built up a little bit. And with a mellotron, I did the voices of that. And I love that theme so much. Every time we do in concert, there is something magic that comes, really.
It's always a high point. Did he tell you specifically things he wanted, and did you react to that, or did you come to him with some music and then he gave you feedback, kind of like which came first?
No, he was very, he let me always very free, but he didn't have decision. I mean, it was or yes or no. When you meet a person, you are quite afraid. You mean, I must do what he wants. After a while, when you become more friend, and then things in the years change, you think, now he knows me very well. He will like, sure. No, with Lucio it was not so necessary, so logical. I mean, also in the last works, except maybe in the Cat in the Brain, because he told me just write what you want, and I wrote something good, and I love that's the score. But when we did the Paura, we knew each other very well. I knew what Lucio could want. But one theme he didn't like, and he told me it was a shit. So he was like this. When you are talking about art, there are no friends. After 10 minutes, you could go and eat together, laughing for our life.
Well, one of the things we talked about when we were discussing your music was that you bring this element of sadness to these horror themes. Where does that come from?
People who know me, maybe you know me very well. For example, maybe you can say that I always laughing, but I'm not the real Fabio. When I'm with friends, I'm always very happy and so. But I think that inside me there is always some not bad consideration about life. But I know that life has the white and the black, and I always have known this. So maybe when I'm around thinking about it comes naturally. I mean, I don't know if it was a logical idea, but every time I write for a love theme, or for example, there is, according to me, a beautiful love theme in Devil Fish. But there is always something, joy. Love is joy. But there is always something back, that it's not the same flower. It's a little sad, a little melancholic. Maybe this was my chance to find a way also on horror movies to comment, to say something like this, more human. No, not only when you talk about devil, when you talk about the beyond, that is real horror. But beyond the horror, there is always a man, a woman, and they suffer. They live it this in another way, not so spectacular, more intimate. And this maybe is the good thing I could find.
I'm wondering, a lot of the Italian horror films that were coming out then, not just the films you were composing for, but also the ones Goblin did music for. The Italian films had such a very different musical sound than anything in America. So did you feel you were having influences from Italy or from just someplace completely different?
Despite what some great composers, like, for example, Morricone did. Morricone, in one interview many years ago, he said, I don't listen to music of other people because I don't want to be influenced. I don't believe. So I think I always loved every kind of music, every kind of good music. I told you other times that I love many musicians. John Williams, for example. John Williams is a genius. He writes extremely well for orchestra, and I loved that kind. You must consider that in Italy we couldn't have those kind of budget. Consider that one typical American score can have a cost which is the same cost for an entire movie in Italy. So imagine, I've seen the costs for something that had to be done in London, which is the name of the studio of the Beatles, Abbey Road. Abbey Road, and and it was a little less than 1 million. So you couldn't spend this. So somebody asked me why I used the keyboards so much in the beginning. And I say, in the beginning, we couldn't spend for orchestra, or we could spend a little bit for orchestra, some strings, not 80 strings. So you had Solina, you had Eminent, and other things, Moog, and so. And the other thing is that many groups, which were our love, the music we loved, used those keyboards, those synthesizers. So we started in that way. But coming back to your question, you can find some Beatles point, some citation. So I don't know if I can say like this. But I think it's a melting pot of many things. You close yourself in front of a piano and everything comes, and there is you have to let that ideas become something new.
You also composed for The City of the Living Dead, which has some amazing scenes, very extreme. So again, when he came to you and said, all right, there's a scene in a car where this girl's gonna, I don't even know how to describe what happens to her. She's kind of disemboweled herself. I don't know. But again, like when you get these kind of scenes, does he usually tell you about the scene, or do you see the footage first and then how do you proceed from there?
Every time was more or less the same thing. The most important thing for me in that moment and in those years was not to have the habit, because first time I've seen Zombie, obviously I was shocked because but we were in Moviola, so we could go ahead, back, ahead, and you could see the cut. So you could see that it wasn't a real person, and and you could laugh. If you go on like this and you lose the magic of the scene, you risk not to write a good music, because you say, okay, this is a puppet. I don't know. It's not a man. It's not a woman. So you must always force yourself to remain in the situation of an horror movie. So if I escaped from that way of doing, I failed. Now, I told you that in Paura, I felt so free that for the beginning, that beautiful scene in the cemetery, but at the beginning it's so sweet and so sad, you know what? And for me, it was the flute, it was the strings, it was da 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 da. But when Lucio heard this, he told me it's not a good song. And also, if I wasn't, I disagree with him. But in Italy, the chief is the director. So you don't like? Okay, keep it away. Then in the end, when everything goes, it's a joy for everybody.
You mentioned that you didn't have the budgets early on to do these big orchestral sounds for the scores. With today's technology, where you have computers that can kind of create almost anything, how has that changed the way you compose and the kind of things you can do?
I can declare that technology helps a lot. Also writing for orchestra, because remember that I had little medium orchestra sometimes. Now, for the Beyond, for example, we had the orchestra. But one of the problems that I can tell you that maybe a lot of people doesn't think about, when you wrote on paper for, let's say, 50 person, you had a copier, I don't know the real name, a person who kept the score, the total score, and used to write the single parts for the guitar, for the first violin, second violin, and then the day after you are recording, he arrives, give each part to each musician. Maybe he wrote during the night, and he arrived. It was a zombie when he arrived in studio the day after, and we start. But how many mistakes you could find? Because the poor man coping with the little light could make. So before recording, we read, we correct the mistakes, and after we start recording. You can imagine the technology nowadays. You can print in your home, in your studio, everything. You test with your ears before telling it's okay, and you know that your printer doesn't make mistakes. So you get in the studio, you say let's record, and you can record immediately. You can imagine how much of money less you spend today. Concerning sounds, I disagree. We have wonderful sounds, but the real orchestra is the real orchestra. So you cannot substitute. You can do something else, or as great composers do, and I try to do every time, you can mix. You can have, for example, percussions are so beautiful, the folk percussion. But strings, you must have an orchestra. So you have to put together things and things. It's another way of composing. You must have the real ideas to get together, and you can have great results.
All right, well, thank you very much for taking some time before your show.
Thank you to you, and I hope you like it. Ciao.
I had to let Fabio go to do a sound check and then perform. After the concert, I grabbed Ryan Nestor, a musician who attended the concert as if it were a religious service in a church. I am outside Brick by Brick, where Fabio Frizzi just finished his concert. It's hard to find a quiet spot right now because there are still people milling around trying to meet and greet the maestro. I am speaking with Ryan Nestor, who is a musician who just watched the concert, and I wanted to find out what he thought about it. So, Ryan, what did you just experience?
Oh, well, what I just experienced was a culmination of music that is unique in that it captures what the film shows and sort of this guilty pleasure of the viewer. We watch these horror films, and yet the music is able to simultaneously capture the energy of the film and sort of please our viewing pleasure. And so I just saw this music for the first time live. It's music I've heard for so long, and yet it just felt like seeing an old friend or something. It was so amazing to hear it live.
So this was Fabio Frizzi doing a lot of the scores from the Lucio Fulci Italian horror films of the 70s and 80s. What about this music is different from what most horror music does?
Well, I think Italian horror film, the horror film genre in general, they use music so differently than almost all other films in the horror genre, in that the music comes from almost a rock band or prog rock aesthetic, and it can almost seem simplistic, and yet it captures such a wide range of feelings, both on the screen and what the viewer, I think, is kind of experiencing. And I think that's very different than the traditional orchestral model, which might be more based in, well, a traditional model where you're giving a sense of dissonance or jagged rhythm to kind of portray the scene. Here you have much more of just I don't want to use the word simplistic too often, but a rock idiom, but they use that just enveloping volume and the intensity, this growing intensity of volume, phrase by phrase. It's an amazing way to capture the scenes of the horror films.
Because a lot of horror music that's kind of conventional is kind of punctuating jump scares and essentially kind of telling you what to feel rather than and a lot of this music tonight that we heard, there's this kind of sadness to it and this kind of otherworldly quality that is not necessarily what you would expect in these kind of, and these are like gore fest kind of horror films. These are not subtle in any means. They're very over the top. So what do you think led to that? Why do you think these Italian films were so different?
Honestly, I don't know why it was the directors and the musicians who came up with this group. I mean, both Argento and Fulci both sort of used in a lot of their films this kind of ensemble and more or less a similar musical aesthetic. I'm not sure who did it first or if this was a sort of thing that just happened, but I think people quickly responded positively, and it's so powerful and effective to see these films and to hear this sort of musical accompaniment.
I mean, you're a musician, and I was just curious if maybe you had any insight into why that kind of music might have worked so well.
I think that this music, it takes relatively basic musical structures, and it lets the listener kind of become attached to them, and they amplify. There's a sense of rhythm that just builds and builds and builds, and it's very easy to attach it to what's going on in the scene. And I think to contrast that with your question previously, where traditional musical accompaniments for horror film, where they're just telling you their pops and their jarring dissonance, to tell you, oh, this is a scary moment. In this situation, the music is with you. It's very much, you're aware of it. It comes from a place that many people can relate to from their youth. It's a music that's coming out of the rock tradition. And I think that there's an energy in this music that is just it works so well with the intensity of the Italian horror genre. But there's a mystery to this as well. I mean, I don't know why it works so well. I mean, look at the response. It's an overwhelming music.
You are a musician at UCSD, and you actually performed the score of Suspiria live. What made you want to do that, and what did you think that would either bring to the film, or what would it do to make people more aware of what that music was doing?
So I am a classical musician, and of course, I have a passion for playing music and relating to an audience, making music live and feeling that relationship between those listening and those on stage. I'm also, my whole life, I have loved the horror genre, and it's Italian horror films that I came to later actually in life that I now judge all horror films by. I think that the music of Argento and in Suspiria, and of course in Fulci's Zombie 2, Frizzi's score, it is just the perfect music for these films. It's memorable, it's intense. To answer your question about why perform this live when this is music for a film, I think that this music uniquely translates to a live idiom. You only need a certain handful of players. This music is rooted in a sort of rock tradition. There's just this, when you hear it live, it might even be better than at home on your television. You can envelop the audience, which is what Argento actually originally intended. He wanted to almost obscure parts of the dialogue. He wanted the audience to feel the music and to sense the music more than almost anything else. And I think that that's a very good reason to play it live and to remind people of that, because now on our TVs that can sort of get lost. The music is very, very important to Argento, and I think also to Fulci.
I have to say, I went to see your performance of the Suspiria score, and it opens in black right before the titles. And the first thing, I'm not terribly musical, so I'm not sure I'm identifying the instruments right, but I think the first thing was some sort of drum, timpani drums, or...
Yeah.
When you were playing it live, I could feel the music like coming up from the floor, like through my body. And it was just like there were chills. I got goosebumps when that started.
Well, just to reiterate, I had discovered some interviews of Dario Argento, and I know that when they were scoring the Suspiria with Goblin, the idea was to have the music in the forefront of the film. In the final mix that they sent to the theaters, it was music, sound effects, dialogue in that order. And now that it's on DVD, that has actually been much more equalized. The equalization is much different than the original, to my understanding, the original premiere. And so I think playing it live, not only do you have these musicians standing in front of you, so that automatically draws the attention of the audience, of course, but you can EQ it the way you want. And we were able to really bring that level of volume that I think Argento wanted. It doesn't take a lot to make that energy, the film is just shaking with energy. It's an intense film, and that music is just so well suited.
So why do you think it's important for contemporary audiences who may not be familiar with these kind of horror films to test them out or sample them? I mean, there wasn't a huge crowd here, but it was a highly appreciative crowd. And I feel like these films really hold up well. I watch them again and again, and I wish more people would see them. But why do you think it might be important for a younger audience or a new audience or a new generation to kind of go and revisit these or visit them for the first time?
Well, as you stated, the audience was not huge, but it is there was a great intensity and an appreciation from this audience, myself included. And I'm no stranger to that. As a musician specializing in contemporary classical music, very often the situation is that I perform for very small audiences, but they're audiences who have come out for a particular reason. And I think that it's not so much a question, I don't think, of, well, why should audiences come out to see this movie or new music? I think that the responsibility is with musicians, curators, and artists to just continue doing what they think is important. And there will always be people will follow that. You saw here tonight. Maybe we didn't need much bigger of an audience. It was a great audience. We always wanted bigger, but it was a good audience, and these films will never go away, and this music will never go away. It's in the canon, now. It's such good music, and they're such good films. It's a very hard question to answer, though, because I want everyone to like these films, but the reality is that not everyone wants to like these films. So I think that people like Miguel and yourself, people like me, we just have to do what we're passionate about, and people come out of the woodwork. There was a very eclectic group here tonight that loves this music, and these films.
Did you have a favorite piece tonight that he played?
Zombie. Absolutely. That's the horror film by which I judge all others. Maybe a close tie with Suspiria, but that's my favorite film score for a horror film is Zombie. Absolutely.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much.
That was Ryan Nestor, who I'm hoping will have an opportunity to perform the score to Suspiria live again in San Diego because it was such an amazing and breathtaking experience. Now for the final interview with Miguel Rodriguez and John Condit. It was after the concert was over and after Miguel had dropped off all the Italians at their hotel room. We started talking around 2 a.m. on Friday morning. Maybe it was a bad idea to do the interview then, but the emotions they expressed were very genuine. The Fabio Frizzi concert ended a few hours ago. And Miguel, you had a bit of an emotional moment at the end of the concert.
Because what we're looking at is taking the darkness and making it art. And how do we make it art with the artists that are surrounding me on this stage right now? This man, I've seen his name. Oh, they're shutting me off? I've seen his name on the screen since I was like 6 years old, 7 years old, 10 years old, and now I'm standing on stage next to him. I had a fucking coffee with him yesterday on the fucking beach.
Tell me how you felt at the end.
Well, God, it wasn't necessarily how I felt at the end. It's how I felt throughout the concert. It's how I felt throughout this very surreal 2 days where I've had a chance to mingle, to essentially just be around, hang out with, on a personal level, with this figure who's been with me essentially as far back as I can remember. You know, we think about these kind of legendary, mythical, celebrity status figures in art and culture or movies, pop culture or what have you, and we never think that they're real human beings until they ask you to join them for a walk around the beach and have a cup of coffee with them. And that's precisely what happened with Fabio Frizzi yesterday. We've been planning this for about a year. It's been a very trying experience to put this show on in San Diego, and it's been very expensive, and it's a high-cost event. But it's also a passion event. So and everything that drives that passion was in play on stage for 2 hours, which, by the way, was longer than they played the first and only last time I got to see them. Only this time they were there because we made it possible. And, we're the ones who signed the immigration paperwork. We're the ones who really got them to play in the United States this time. It was kind of us doing that. And that moment that you talked about when it was just before their encore, when they finished the Beyond score, I was there, and Fabio reached his hand, invited me onto the stage, and I didn't have anything prepared to say, but I just let it all out, like, exactly why I think they're so important, exactly why I went through extraordinary personal cost to make this happen, and why I think it's completely worth it, because this is something that I identify with, and I think in a lot of ways Fabio Frizzi's music is like a soundtrack for our lives, a soundtrack for the lives of people who are kind of freaks or feel outcast or have at any point. And he gives us a voice, and to have him pull me on stage and immediately embrace me was a bit much. It was a lot to handle.
And what did you have to say about your initial connection to this music when you were younger?
One thing I do think about Fabio Frizzi's music in particular, film scores in general, but Frizzi's music in particular, is he provided the scores to these really over-the-top gore films, really. I mean, exploitation films. But there's this bizarre marriage of the trashy exploitation, the over-the-top carnage and violence, and then this strange kind of art house mystique that especially Lucio Fulci and his directors of photography would put into the images, and that Fabio Frizzi would put into the soundscape. There's this marriage that is something wholly unique that you just can't find it anywhere else. And that's why people watch these movies. When people who are first introduced to these movies, they don't know what to make of them. They're like, what is this? What's even going on? And it's because they are not totally coherent. They're not totally linear. They are like a fever dream in a lot of ways. And a lot of that is owed to Fabio Frizzi. And so I was introduced to these films at a very early age because, my family, particularly my aunts and my grandmother, would take me to the video store. I grew up on home video, and a little bit later there was the zombie release that I would see the cover for ages and beg to see it because it has that amazing image of the conquistador zombie that's in it with the worms coming out of the eye hole. And I always wanted to see that movie. And so we watched it, and you have these expectations for a horror film, particularly with the music of the horror film, where there are lots of like jump scare notes and the kind of like, oh, I hear the scary music, now the scary thing's gonna happen. It kind of builds your expectation. But the music in Zombie and the music in a lot of Lucio Fulci's films, Fabio Frizzi's scores, wasn't like that. It wasn't this track your expectations. It was more of an ethereal, atmospheric. It held you by the hand as you walked through this fever dream, and it touches. It's strange that it touches you instead of scares you, because rather than be this, what we think of horror in America especially as this ooh boo and this jump scare kind of thing, it's more of a tragedy. It's hard to explain without hearing the music. I'm sure you'll play a clip, but in Zombie in particular, you have the typical Night of the Living Dead kind of, they're trapped in a building, in this case a old church or a hospital. It's a church, and the zombies of course are breaking through the door, but the music is not at all what you'd expect. It's more like it's more tragic, it's more sad. And I remember that was one of my first times as a child saying, who did this? Who's responsible for this music? Why does it sound like this? And actually searching the credits for a name. And I remember seeing Fabio Frizzi. It helps that it's alliterative, it's short. It's a very, it's a punchy name, Fabio Frizzi, So that's one of those names that just sticks out in my head. And seeing his name on the back of movie covers is one of the things that would make me rent a movie, because back in those days you would go to the video store, and you've got a whole smorgasbord to choose from, but you can only have one movie. It's not like Netflix, whereas and whatever you get, you're SOL, that's it. You better like it, or who cares? And so it's like, oh, well, this one was scored by Fabio Frizzi, so it must be good. And yeah, man, you ask these questions, and it's like a biography, so I go on and on.
John, you helped sponsor this event here. Why did you want to put this on?
There's not a lot of opportunities that you have in your life to do something where you can bring something that's literally magic to your own locality. I don't know if everyone in San Diego really appreciates what happened this evening. Fabio Frizzi is one of the greatest Italian composers of our time. And for me, this was about bringing something very, very special that people would appreciate, but it was almost like if you weren't there tonight, you missed something magical. I was in tears from the moment they took the stage to the moment they left. And I wanted to bring something to San Diego and give back to the fandom in a way that a lot of people don't get the chance to. The scores of Frizzi are unique. They're romantic in a way that the Italian films are romantic. They brought something to the American film industry that we hadn't seen before. And for me, bringing them here and sharing that with people is incredibly important.
You know, I was talking to Ryan Nestor, who is a musician from UCSD, who performed the Suspiria score live. And we were talking about, I wonder what these films would play like if you took Fabio Frizzi's score off and put a conventional kind of a jump scare score that punctuates it. And I would just be curious to see two audiences being able to watch the original score and the other one and just see if there was what kind of different reaction you would get to what's on screen.
I don't think that asserting that Lucio Fulci's films would be lesser without Fabio Frizzi's score is really doing a disservice at all. I think that's complete truth, and I think Lucio Fulci would be the first to agree with that statement. The thing is, the film is a collaborative art, and if there's anything that Fulci did marvelously well, it was finding his collaborators. But I don't think it would be the same without Frizzi. I mean, it's the Fabio Frizzi, Lucio Fulci collaborations. And Fulci didn't always work with Frizzi, but when they worked together, it was magic. It was like John Carpenter working with Kurt Russell. It was magic when they got together, and certainly the best stuff. And they did their early stuff together, like Zombie was in the late 70s. And when Lucio Fulci did Cat in the Brain, which was many, many, many years later in the early 90s, I believe, he brought Frizzi back, and Frizzi scored that. Cat in the Brain, by the way, is an interesting meta film because in that film, Lucio Fulci directs himself. He plays himself, and he explores the effect that making all these gore films had on his own psyche. And he has this amazing image of that, which is a literal cat just ripping away and eating his brain, and that's why it's called Cat in the Brain. And they project the image, and you see that a lot when they play that, is the cat just like it's a real cat going into a brain. But so I only bring up Cat in the Brain because it was a meta, and it was an extremely personal later life project for Lucio Fulci. And I think it's quite telling that he would go back to his old friend Fabio Frizzi to score it after so many years. So that just for me is one evidence of their indelible pairing.
We've talked about Italian horror films and also Italian spaghetti westerns. And this sense of kind of this Italian operatic sensibility. What do you think it is? Because it's not just Fulci and Frizzi. You have Dario Argento and Goblin, and you have Mario Bava's films. What do you think it is about these Italian horror films that at this particular time, the 70s and 80s, where the sensibility about horror and the choice of music was so different from what was going on here in the United States?
Well, in the 70s and 80s, there's a history in terms of filmmaking. But for that dramatic flair you're talking about, I think that's really a cultural thing with the Italians that is just part of their language. For example, I drove, just hanging out with them, I drove them to the beach, and they don't express themselves like you and I would express ourselves. Just like, oh yeah, it's a nice day at the beach. The sun's out, it's nice. No, it's like, oh, mamma mia, bellissima, bellissima. Oh, Miguel, this is like a magic. Thank you, bellissima. Oh, mamma mia, bellissima. Like it was, the whole van was this ecstatic. All of them were saying this, and it just going to the beach and saying, hey, thanks for bringing us to the beach, it's nice, is a really dramatic musical event of language and expression. And I don't know, I feel like maybe that carries out in the art as well. But you're right, you bring up the spaghetti westerns, and I know you love to talk about Django and the fact that the proxy Ku Klux Klan guys don't wear white hoods, but these bright red hoods, because white hoods are just not Baroque enough. It's and the music to that too, not Frizzi, but it's also really operatic, and it's a Baroque country. If you go big or you don't do anything, the women in the movies are all these huge-haired, fully made up, buxom, amazing goddesses, and they don't take any crap. They like their stern looks, and all of their expressions are very forceful and full of drama and full of music, and I think it's just cultural. But of course, I'm just going on my experience with watching lots of films and 2 days hanging out with a van load of Italians.
John, you are with Dread Central, so you are dealing with horror all the time and with horror fans. What do you think current horror fans feel about these Italian horror films? Are you feeling that there is a connection with a large contingent of contemporary horror fans, or do you feel you have to kind of push it towards them in order to make them take some note?
For me, it's about being a steward of the genre and introducing people to some things that came before. It's weird for me because the films that kids grow up on these days are within the last 5 to 10 years. And when I was a kid growing up, and the films that I watched, I grew up on films from the 70s and 80s and 60s. But kids today, they're lucky to see films that are even 5 or 10 years older than they were at the time. It's weird because things these days are so disposable, and there's so much noise and so much content. These kids are already growing up on films that are remade within 5 to 10 years of themselves.
When you do have a million streaming services with a million options, and you have younger people, I'm being really stereotypical, but generalizing, you know, the new generations of fans clicking through Netflix or whatever, they're going to want a safe bet, I think. When I was a teenager and in high school, we wanted to find the craziest, most insane, most disturbing stuff we could. It was like a test. You know, you're a jerky little kid, and you want to make sure that you watch the nastiest thing you can find. And you could always count on the Italians, because the Italians had Mondo Cane, which had some of the worst, most brutal, most absolute exploitative garbage that has ever been committed to celluloid. You know, like Goodbye Uncle Tom and the original Mondo Cane, and some stuff that's truly putrid. And of course, the Italians had Cannibal Holocaust.
With horror, the Italians really pushed the envelope. They said, what can we do that is going to shock people? But I don't really know that it was meant to be shocking. It was a lot of, what can we bring to the table that's going to be unique?
I haven't read any of the novels, but I hear they're the same way. Like a lot of the pulp novels, which the pulp crime novels where a lot of the giallos are based on. But certainly the comics, which I have read a lot of. The comics are just vicious and brutal and are filled with great bodily harm and rape and all kinds of stuff. And so I think it's just Italian pop culture in general pushes the envelope a lot more. One great example actually is the splinter in the eye scene in Zombie. It's great. There were definitely people tonight when they projected that scene that had not seen it before, because when the splinter actually goes into the eyeball, nobody really expects it to go all the way. Because a lot of those movies, you have the getting closer to the eyeball, and then the rest of it's kind of off screen, and it lets you do your imagination.
Yeah,
but
in
this
American
does not.
Filmmaking, it would have stopped there.
Yeah.
But the Italians were like, no, screw that. We're gonna go all the way into the eyeball, and then we're gonna pop the eyeball out of the side, and you're gonna have to sit for the whole ride. The filmmakers were pushing what they could show on camera, and the scores, especially of Fabio Frizzi, were right there with the filmmakers. They were saying, we're going to take this a little bit farther than you're comfortable with, and the music would be note for note right there with the filmmaker. I don't know that they understood what they were doing at the time, but everything just kind of flowed.
Yeah, I kind of just came up with something. Well, I didn't. This is another point that I was thinking too about people's tastes today. Horror has gone verite, and that is just antithetical to what the Italian horror was. So, I mean, everybody wants everything to be so realistic and to follow, logically they wouldn't do that. Well, fuck logic. That's what makes this fun. There's a great book. I'm trying to remember exactly what it's called, but it's very dry and academic, but it traces the history of Italian horror all the way back, very, very early silent eras through Fulci and Argento and even now. The book at the very beginning says, if I had to describe horror, I would call it hallucinatory horror. And that's totally correct. And one thing that, for people who are used to the idea that a film is not good unless it adheres to as realistic a regimen as possible or as realistic an approach as possible, then something like City of the Living Dead will really throw them. Or Manhattan Baby will really throw them, because there's a lot of what the hell just happened in this movie? Why did this scene immediately follow that scene? It just doesn't make any sense. One thing I love about all these movies, it's not the most realistic thing in the world. You know how they did it. They took a mold of a head, and I don't know exactly what they made the eyeball out of, some kind of gelatin or whatever, and that splinter goes all the way into that molded head. It works. It's effective. We buy into it. But I think that's part. And the blood is this fire engine gush. It's beautiful, but it's not realistic. It's representational. It's something that you have to buy into. And I think for me, that is what makes it more memorable than say if I was gonna say what is verite horror these days, found footage is probably the most extreme example of that. And there's very few found footage that I find memorable. It's actually more like a roller coaster, because with a roller coaster, you have the experience in the moment, and then once you get off the roller coaster, you say, "Oh, that was fun," and then it's gone. The memory's gone, really, of the actual heart pumping of the roller coaster. Whereas something like The Beyond is not really, it's more tragic and more disturbing and more, when you buy into that ridiculous world and actually follow Catriona MacColl and care about, and David Warbeck, and actually care about what happens to their characters, and hear that Fabio Frizzi music with that lone flute, dun, 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 dun. You remember it. I have dreams about it. It sticks with me. It calls back to me days after I've seen it. I still hear the music.
We just screened the remastered Phantasm. And looking at that, an American film,
Very
it
Italian.
feels very Italian and very influenced by kind of Fulci and Argento and even the music of Fabio Frizzi.
The music is amazing. I can't remember the names of the two composers on it now because it's 3 a.m. or something now. But 2:47, I was close. But yeah, I mean the music and just like in a lot of the Frizzi ones, he does this kind of theme and variations where the main theme echoes throughout the film and might have a couple of variations here and there. So you find yourself pulled into the movie by this repetitive melody, dark melody, and that's part of what makes it almost like an earworm. But because the movie is connected to the melody, it traps the movie in your head, and I think it makes it more memorable. That's why I think one of the reasons I think Phantasm is so memorable. Or even if you want to go back older, the Psycho score by Bernard Herrmann is another one. When she's driving and he's like that driving scene with that music, and to say nothing about the shrieking shower murder scene.
To bring this back to Frizzi and the concert that you just put on, did you have a favorite moment at the concert?
Man, that's really hard. Other than when I got to go on stage and give Frizzi a hug in front of everybody and get a kiss from Giulietta on the cheek. I'm going to go with Blast Fighter being the first encore song because that song's awesome. I don't really have a favorite moment. No, I can't say I do because the whole thing was one holistic experience.
I have to agree with Miguel. And part of that is because I really don't have as expansive knowledge of Italian filmmaking as Miguel does. But for me, there's one standout moment. And it played out last night at dinner when Alessi played the refrain from The Beyond on the piano. That discordant piece is beautiful. And when they played it live, it was very haunting, and I think that will stick with me forever in the way that Angus Scrimm reading, Poe at the Weekend of Horrors will stick with me. It was the kind of thing that you had to be there for, and seeing very, very talented musicians bring to life things that I've seen on film was amazing. But there's something about that off-key discordant piece. It's very much indicative of everything about The Beyond. Everything about The Beyond is very off-key, very strange, and as you watch it, you're like, why does this make sense? Why are they doing that? How does that fit here? Why does she have no eyes? Why is there a goddamn German Shepherd? Like, you don't know. That nothing really fits. And at the end, they're fucking, like, they walk out the door and there's nothing there. And you're just like, well, I've been along for the ride.
I think to end, and we'll stick with The Beyond for a second, one of the great scenes, spoiler alert, is the climax takes place in the hospital, and David Warbeck and Catriona MacColl are running around, and suddenly they escape the zombies, and they go down a flight of stairs, and suddenly they're on this spiral staircase going into her basement back at her mansion. And David Warbeck it's one of the greatest bits of acting he does in the whole film, when they reach the bottom landing and she's like, we're back at the house. And he goes, impossible. And that is exactly describing the movie. I love that scene. And we'll end there.
We do have to end. All right. I do want to thank you for participating in this till 3-something in the morning. So that is it. Thanks for listening to another edition of the KPBS listener-supported Cinema Junkie podcast. It'll be a month of horrors in October with upcoming podcasts on Clive Barker's Nightbreed, horror literature, Godzilla, and more. Also, check out the Cinema Junkie Facebook page for 31 days of Italian horror. If listening to Cinema Junkie has become a bit of a habit, then we'd love to have you support the show with a donation at kpbs.org/feedthejunkie. But if you're financially strapped, or just cheap, then it only costs you a minute of your time to leave us a review or a rating on iTunes. But it's just as important to the show. So, till our next Film Fix, I'm Beth Accomando, your resident Cinema Junkie.
KPBS On Demand is supported by Splatero, helping homeowners pay off debt or for home improvements by offering streamlined access to your home's equity with no additional monthly payments or new debt. Splatero provides a lump sum payment in exchange for a share of your home's future value. Learn more at splatero.com.